foreign aid.
Foreign aid. Foreign aid.
I call foreign aid poison.
Between 1960 and 2003, our continent received $600 billion of aid. We are still told that there is a lot of poverty in Africa. Where has all the aid gone?
Imagine this. Every year, Africa receives over $60 to $70 billion in foreign aid. Grants, loans, humanitarian assistance, you name it. On the surface, it sounds like charity, like generosity, like the West is saving lives. I mean, the cameras are rolling, celebrities are holding starving children, and politicians are giving endless speeches about saving the continent. But here's what they're not telling you. For every dollar that flows into Africa as aid, almost $2 flows right back out into Western bank accounts, corporate profits, and offshore havens. The math is simple and devastating. Africa is actually funding the West, not the other way around. Your aid programs aren't saving Africa. They're the perfect cover story for the biggest wealth extraction scheme in modern history. But this story goes much deeper than simple theft, because what you're about to discover will flip everything you think you know about foreign aid completely upside down. Picture this. You live on top of some of the richest mineral deposits on Earth. Your land contains the cobalt needed for every smartphone battery, laptop, electric car, and renewable energy storage system on the planet. Yet somehow, you're living on less than $2 a day while watching foreign companies extract billions from your backyard. This is the reality for many people. Africa holds as much as 30% of global mineral reserves, and even higher percentages of the world's gold, platinum, diamonds, and manganese. In 2022 alone, the Democratic Republic of Congo accounted for approximately 73% of worldwide cobalt production. The same country mined nearly 41% of the world's tantalum supply in 2023. You know, that metal that makes smartphones capacitors and high-performance electronics possible. Most of that cobalt ends up in the hands of companies based in the US, Canada, and Europe. And many of those mines, they pay almost nothing in taxes. Some even use child labor. So next time you think of modern foreign aid, forget rice and medicine. Think cobalt, gold, rare earth minerals, crude oil, diamonds. Since the 90s, transnational corporations have once again become the dominant force as owners and managers of major mining projects across Africa.
Let's take companies like Shell and Chevron, for example, multinational oil giants who have extracted trillions in oil wealth from Nigeria while leaving behind environmental disasters, poisoned rivers, and unemployed communities. Or Glencore, who pleaded guilty to multiple scandals from manipulating the prices of oil to rig the markets in their favor, as well as bribing high-ranking government officials to secure preferential access to oil and other resources, particularly in countries like Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Equatorial Guinea, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Glencore faced substantial fines and penalties from various authorities, including the US Department of Justice, the UK Serious Fraud Office, the Swiss Attorney General's Office, and in total, they were ordered to pay over $1.5 billion in settlements related to these investigations. Here's where it gets really twisted. In 2017, 70,000 miners were displaced by Ugandan military and police in a town called Mubende. These innocent men, women, and children were forcefully removed from their homes to make way for a Canadian-listed mining corporation. These were local miners who had been working these lands for generations, and they were literally thrown off their own territory so foreign corporations could move in. When asked about it, an Ugandan government official didn't even try to hide what was happening, telling local media that illegal miners should just, quote, pack and vacate the mines, otherwise my police force will help them pack. Talk about sacrificing your own people for the sake of a billion-dollar company that couldn't care less about you. The technology sector, on the other hand, has created what can only be described as a modern gold rush, except the gold diggers are getting paid starvation wages while tech billionaires count their profits. Tech firms like Apple, Samsung, and Tesla often rely on resource supply chains that lead directly back to Africa, while the profits never do. British companies in Sierra Leone have been accused of land grabbing, fueling, and even causing one young woman to contract HIV after being pressured into work to fund her education. So every time you charge your phone or drive an electric car, keep in mind that you very well might be using materials extracted under these conditions. This systematic extraction goes far beyond individual mining companies. Take France's relationship with its former colonies. 14 African countries are forced to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves with the French treasury through the CFA franc system. And since 1961, these countries have transferred an estimated $500 billion to France through this mandatory reserve requirement. That's $500 billion that could have been used to develop roads, schools, hospitals, and other infrastructure that actually helps their citizens. But instead, it all gets funneled away into fattening the pockets of the French government. But here's the most infuriating part. Contrary to popular belief, foreign aid actually helps Western countries more than African countries. In 2024, just 12% of funds distributed by US aid went directly to local organizations. And the rest of the money, they flow right back to Western companies, contractors, and consultants, creating jobs in America, increasing the goods they sell to African countries, and providing lucrative contracts for Western businesses. In Africa, they provide the raw materials and get back a tiny fraction as aid that mostly benefits the donors. So when politicians on TV say they're helping Africa, what they really mean is they're putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound while pulling the trigger with the other hand. This systematic abuse is just the foundation for an even more sinister financial web that keeps entire nations trapped in permanent debt slavery. Now let's talk about how Western banks have turned African debt into their own personal ATM machine. The same institutions pushing aid are also pushing debt that ensures Africa can never break free. These debts didn't appear out of nowhere. Many were taken on with the promise of growth, development, or rebuilding. But the reality? Corrupt leaders pocketed the loans. Infrastructure projects were ghosted, and the people? They're left footing the bill. More and more African governments are in debt to Western banks, asset managers, and oil traders compared to any other creditor group. And the interest rates charged on these Western private loans, they're almost double that of Chinese loans. The numbers are absolutely staggering. African countries pay over $60 billion a year just in interest alone. In 2022, public debt in Africa reached $1.8 trillion. To put that in perspective, Africa's total debt has increased by 183% since 2010, an almost triple increase in less than a single generation, and a rate roughly 4 times higher than that of its GDP. Western private creditors aren't just lending money, they're creating permanent debt slavery through systems like the Eurobond. Sounds fancy, but they're basically financial weapons designed to extract maximum interest from their victims. Eurobonds are a craze that possessed the continent in the second decade of the 21st century, where countries like Kenya saw hundreds of millions of dollars simply disappear into thin air from their very first Eurobond issuance, while Mozambique had loans illegally withdrawn and misused in what became known as the tuna bond scandal. Here's how the debt weapon works in practice. Western banks convince African governments to take on massive loans for development projects. The money flows through complex financial structures that ensure most of it ends up back in Western companies and contractors. When African countries inevitably struggle to repay these deliberately unpayable debts, creditors don't just want their money back, they want assets. Ports, mines, oil fields, mineral rights, access to valuable resources, and other critical infrastructure. It's colonialism through financial contracts instead of military conquest. Like the situation with Zambia. After defaulting on Chinese loans, rumors quickly circulated that Zambia was being forced to hand over operational control of its national copper mine, Konkola, as well as their national electricity company to Chinese creditors as part of a debt settlement. The mine represented a significant portion of Zambia's copper production capacity and is now effectively controlled by foreign interests because of unpayable debt obligations. The legitimacy of these claims have since been largely debated. This threat hangs over every African country with significant debt. 20 low-income African countries are either bankrupt or at high risk of debt distress. Every dollar spent servicing these deliberately unpayable debts is a dollar not spent on schools, hospitals, or infrastructure that might actually help African people break free from this cycle. Nearly 57% of the African population, or about 751 million people, live in countries that spend more on interest payments than on education, healthcare, and social services combined. Debt slavery is just one tool in a much larger strategy designed to create permanent dependency that goes far beyond simple financial control. Robert Greene's 11th law of power states, "Learn to keep people dependent on you." Western aid programs have turned this principle into a science, creating a system where African countries become so dependent on foreign assistance that they lose the ability to develop independent economies or make sovereign decisions. The dependency starts with the ruthless destruction of local markets and industries. If a country wants a loan from the World Bank or IMF, they have to quote-unquote liberalize their economy. That means cutting subsidies, slashing social services, and opening up their markets to foreign companies. It all sounds harmless, until you realize it's a recipe for permanent dependency. When Western countries flood African markets with free or subsidized goods through aid programs, they destroy local businesses that can't compete with free products. Ethiopian coffee farmers go out of business when Western NGOs distribute free food. Local textile workers lose their jobs when donated clothing floods the market. The aid doesn't just fail to help, it actively prevents economic development. African governments have even become so dependent on aid that they plan their national budgets with foreign assistance already factored in as guaranteed income. Nearly half of most African countries' budgets comes from financial assistance provided by other nations and international organizations, leaving African citizens in no position to influence their own government's economic policies or development agendas. When your government doesn't need tax revenue from its own people, it doesn't need to be accountable to those people. This creates a perverse incentive structure where African leaders focus on pleasing foreign donors rather than serving their own populations. Mozambique provides a stark example of how dependency deepens over time. Since they started receiving foreign aid, the level of dependency as a percentage of their GDP rose by 16 percentage points in less than 20 years. Zambia, which was categorized as a middle-income country when it first gained its independence, is now positioned among the poorest nations in the world, despite receiving massive foreign aid over many decades. On the other hand, countries like Tanzania, Botswana, and Mauritius have shown that aid can work when it's directly invested in citizens' needs and infrastructure development. But these examples are few and far between because dependency is more profitable for both corrupt leaders and foreign interests. The psychological dependency is perhaps even more damaging than the economic dependency. After decades of being told they need foreign assistance to survive, many African countries have internalized the belief that they cannot develop without external help. This mindset prevents the kind of bold, independent thinking that successful development requires. The dependency trap ensures that African countries remain markets for Western goods while providing cheap raw materials and labor. It's a form of economic colonialism that's more effective than direct political control because it appears voluntary and humanitarian. However, this dependency system requires one more crucial element to function properly: ensuring that the same corrupt leaders who facilitate this extraction remain in power indefinitely. Now we get to perhaps the most explosive part of the story: how aid agencies like USAID have been connected to funding the very terrorist groups they claim to be fighting against.
Mr. Roman, are you aware that we are sending $40 million a week to the Taliban?
Yes, sir.
Can you name other instances of foreign aid going to terrorist organizations?
We have assisted Al-Shabaab in Somalia. There's been instances of the Khamzi network in Sudan, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Kataib al-Hezbollah, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams in Syria. Dozens of terror organizations have received indirect assistance from U.S. foreign aid.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the mechanisms in place that are to stop foreign aid from going to terrorist groups, and why are they not working if we have any in place? Sure. And I would note that these are, you notice these are terrorist weaponry. You see some AKs, SKSs, some snipers, some clips, some clip carriers probably made in China, and I believe these are small landmines here beside right there.
Why, you might ask? Because war is profitable.
This isn't about being pro-war. This is about being pro-money.
And chaos creates a vacuum foreign powers are more than happy to fill with troops, with weapons, with advisors. The more unstable a region is, the easier it is to control. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory. It's been debated in the U.S. Congress itself.
USAID was created through executive order in 1961 by President Kennedy. long having lost and strayed from its mission, lost its direction. Even the Clinton administration tried unsuccessfully to reform it. And we spend, I don't know, somewhere between $40 and $50 billion annually on this organization. And quite honestly, if our enemies were asked to design a foreign aid program that would actively undermine the United States of America at maximum cost to the taxpayer, they would be hard-pressed to create a scheme more effective than USAID. That's shocking to say, but I just, it's, look, let's just go to a couple things here. We left Afghanistan, and I'll just I'll characterize it as left in August of 2021. August of 2021. So the Taliban's in charge. The Taliban threatens the lives of the NGO personnel distributing USAID. They claim credit for USAID distribution. They interfere with the distribution of USAID aid. They tax the beneficiary of the aid. They tax the delivery service. They steal the food commodities. They divert the funds. They extort citizens for protection for USAID aid. They create sham procurement schemes, and they threaten the lives of those who oppose those schemes. Now, you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You could just read the Taliban is classified, and if you don't know, the Taliban's in charge of Afghanistan. They're classified as a specially designated global terrorist organization by OFAC. So post-2021, so this is last year, 2024, we spent $697 million of the taxpayers' dollars in Afghanistan, including $534,719,000 in change from USAID in Afghanistan. And that money I just mentioned, the $697 million, is on top of and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarajuddin Haqqani. Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden, who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel, entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. This has got to end. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
In 2014, Boko Haram was the most feared terrorist group in the whole of West Africa, and while most of the world assumed they were operating in isolation, the truth is far murkier. Reports have since emerged that USAID may have been indirectly supporting terror groups like Boko Haram through a tangled web of contractors, middlemen, and intelligence proxies, leading the Nigerian government and lawmakers to demand investigations into their activities.
This matter should be a source of concern for every single Nigerian. This matter should be considered and should be deliberated and should be taken serious by the Nigerian government and all those that are charged with the responsibility of protecting the integrity and the security of this country.
While USAID officials deny these allegations, the pattern of aid money flowing to areas that subsequently see increased terrorist activity is hard to ignore. USAID had 141 awards in the Lake Chad region, valued at over $1.1 billion during fiscal years 2015 through 2017, the same area heavily plagued by Boko Haram insurgency. After repeated claims of technically defeating Boko Haram, the group and its splinters, although severely weakened, have retained the ability to deliver deadly strikes on civilian and military targets. So despite all the billions of dollars spent on counterterrorism efforts, the problem keeps getting worse. At this point, either American aid is spectacularly incompetent at achieving its stated goals, or those goals aren't actually what they appear to be. But perhaps the most crucial function of the aid system is ensuring that corrupt African leaders who facilitate resource extraction on behalf of their Western allies remain in power for decades, no matter how much their people suffer. The foreign aid system has a dirty secret that explains why it never seems to work despite decades of efforts and trillions of dollars. It's designed to keep corrupt leaders in power, not remove them. These corrupt leaders are essential partners in the wealth extraction scheme, and their longevity in office is no accident. Look at the numbers. The president of Equatorial Guinea is the longest-serving president in the entire world, holding office since 1979. That's over 4 decades of rule. Paul Biya has been ruling Cameroon since 1982, making him the oldest president in the entire world at 92 years of age. Yoweri Museveni has controlled Uganda since 1986.
Isaias Afwerki has ruled Eritrea with an iron fist since 1993, and Denis Sassou Nguesso has dominated the Republic of Congo for 28 years. All these men have been, apparently, democratically elected, despite their countries remaining in shambles while they accumulate massive personal wealth. So, how do they manage to keep winning elections in countries where the majority of people live in poverty? Well, the answer is quite simple. Foreign aid money helps them buy military equipment, rig elections, and suppress opposition movements so they continue to stay in power. Former President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, provides a perfect case study. During his presidency, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria stated that Zimbabwe misused $7.3 million intended for fighting diseases. In 1995, senior officials were found to have stolen approximately $12 million from the National Housing Fund, which was meant to house the poor. Instead, Mugabe used it to acquire luxurious real estate, both within Zimbabwe and abroad, for himself, his family, and close associates. When Uganda received debt relief, equivalent to $790 million in 1999, the first thing President Museveni did was buy himself a new presidential jet. This isn't an exception, it's the rule. Patricia Adams of Probe International stated that in most cases, Western governments knew that substantial portions of their loans, up to 30%, says the World Bank, went directly into the pockets of corrupt officials for their personal use. The World Bank even called these same corrupt governments their partners in development. These corrupt leaders serve as the perfect buffer between Western corporations and African populations. They deflect blame for poverty and underdevelopment while ensuring that resource extraction continues uninterrupted.
This brings us to arguably the most infuriating part of this entire foreign aid charade, and it perfectly illustrates Robert Greene's 12th law of power. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. Western nations use aid as moral cover while engaging in the very exploitation they claim to oppose. You've seen the commercials, the sad music, the fly-covered children, the celebrities pleading for $1 a day, foreigners helping kids in dire situations. Every single aid advertisement showing starving children serves a dual purpose. It makes Western audiences feel good about their generosity, while providing political cover for massive wealth extraction. Western celebrities play a particularly insidious role in this moral facade. Popular stars like Madonna, David Beckham, John Legend, Oprah Winfrey, and countless others have all raised money for Africa, while there's no doubt that the vast majority of them are well-meaning. However, the spectators never seem to question the systems that create African poverty in the first place.
The moral facade serves another crucial function. perpetuating negative stereotypes about Africa being incompetent and needing a savior. These campaigns are not about saving lives. They're about shaping perception. They convince the public that Africa is helpless and cannot solve their own problems, that they lack the intelligence, resources, or capability to develop their societies, and that Western aid is necessary, that without Western intervention, the whole continent would collapse. It's the savior narrative repackaged for the 21st century, and it's everywhere, from Hollywood to NGOs to United Nations speeches. But behind that morality play is a cold calculation. The image of helping justifies the act of taking. Some Western countries seem to act like foreign aid is some sort of reparation that undoes the many atrocities they inflicted on the continent during colonialism. The message is clear. We gave you aid, so we're even now. This allows former colonial powers to continue extracting wealth while claiming moral superiority because they provide humanitarian assistance. The moral facade is perhaps the most evil part of the entire system because it prevents people from seeing what's really happening. It turns legitimate criticism of wealth extraction into attacks on humanitarian efforts, making it socially unacceptable to question the aid system, even when the evidence of its harmful effects is overwhelming. But across Africa, people are finally seeing through this facade and demanding real alternatives that put African interests first. But here's the hopeful part of this story. Africans are waking up to what's happening, and there are real alternatives that could break this cycle of exploitation. The solution isn't more aid, it's ending the systems that make aid necessary in the first place. The first step toward real change is for African countries to stop the outflow of their own wealth before accepting any inflows. Capital flight from Africa since 1970 amounts to $2 trillion. An additional $89 billion annually is lost through illicit financial flows, which is double what the continent receives in official development assistance. Next, debt cancellation, asset recovery, and autonomy. Renegotiate all odious external debts of the poorer nations and seize assets held in illicit tax havens, which as of 2010 total at least $32 trillion. Money stolen from Africa is sitting in Western banks and tax havens. Returning it would provide far more development funding than all current aid programs combined. Across the Sahel, the AES, Alliance of Sahel States, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are rejecting French influence and moving towards greater autonomy. They're demanding control over their own resources and an end to the CFA franc system that has drained wealth from their countries for decades. Replace foreign aid as an income source? African diaspora communities send approximately $95 billion annually back to their homeland in form of remittances, nearly double the amount of official development assistance. These direct transfers from African families to African families bypass corrupt governments and foreign bureaucracies entirely. Countries that focus on facilitating remittances rather than begging for aid consistently see better development outcomes. Trade relationships also need to be fundamentally restructured. About 70% of their resources are invested outside the continent. Instead of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods, African countries need support to develop their own processing and manufacturing capabilities. Countries like Botswana have shown this is possible. They've moved from exporting raw diamonds to cutting and polishing them domestically, capturing far more value from their own natural resources. Regional cooperation offers another path forward. African countries working together can negotiate better deals with foreign investors and reduce their dependence on Western financial systems. The African Continental Free Trade Area represents a step in this direction, creating the potential for intra-African trade that doesn't require Western intermediaries and middlemen. Other African countries are pioneering innovative approaches that bypass traditional aid entirely. Rwanda has begun rejecting traditional aid in favor of direct investment partnerships that create jobs and transfer technology rather than creating dependency. Kenya is pioneering mobile banking platforms like M-Pesa that bypass corrupt intermediaries and enable direct financial transactions between people. Ghana is launching digital infrastructure projects using diaspora bonds and cryptocurrency to fund development without taking on unpayable debt. Most importantly, the international community needs to stop treating the symptoms and start addressing the cause. Africa needs governance systems that serve African people rather than foreign interests, but those systems can only emerge when the external pressures that maintain corrupt leadership are removed. The coups, assassinations, government overthrows, political silencing, false arrests, and imprisonment, and so on and so forth, has to come to an end. So whether it's debt cancellation, asset recovery, or regional cooperation, these all aren't perfect solutions, but they do represent something new: African agency, African innovation, African ownership. Because if foreign aid has taught us anything, it's that dependency is a choice, and it's time to choose differently. So here we are, after decades of foreign aid, trillions of dollars spent, and countless celebrity campaigns to save Africa. And what do we have to show for it? A continent that remains systematically impoverished, while its wealth flows to the same Western countries that claim to be helping. Every time you see an aid advertisement with a starving child, remember that the same countries sending that aid are extracting far more wealth behind the scenes. But the story doesn't end here. Across Africa, young people are demanding real change and asking for the right to engage with the global economy as equals rather than as aid recipients. They're calling for genuine partnerships, control over their own resources, and an end to the systems that keep their countries dependent on foreign aid. So it's time to stop giving them charity and start giving them what they actually deserve: control over their own continent's wealth.